Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome once more to another evening reading of The Northern Lights anthology of Canadian fiction. My name is Pixel Broadside, otherwise known as Pinoy Victoria, your host for tonight. Welcome once again. We are going to continue this tonight with chapter 3 again of Adele Wiseman's The Sacrifice. So please find a nice place to sit back, relax, maybe prepare yourselves a relaxing cup of tea, and let us proceed with chapter 3. Abraham looked the place over, inquired about rent, and made all the necessary calculations before he broached the subject to his family. It was an old semi detached gray wood bungalow with a small open veranda, 2 feet of front lawn, a bedroom for himself and his wife, a living room that could be partially curtained off to make a bedroom for Isaac, and a kitchen. It already had a wood stove and an old wooden table in the kitchen. The wood stove they could pay for in installments. The table the landlord said he would throw in with the wood stove. There was a summer kitchen to store things in, and a small cellar that was reached by a trapdoor in the kitchen and housed the furnace. The house, Abraham considered, was very low on the ground, and with no large cellar, the cold would come up through the floors in the winter. But if he kept the furnace well stocked, and in addition there was the wood stove, they could make it do. To look at, it was shabby. The kitchen floor needed linoleum, and the whole would be pitifully bare at first. But gradually, they could fill it in with furniture, paint a little bit, make it fresh. There were things a man could do himself in a place like this, and Sarah would find an outlet too, fixing and cleaning. Before mentioning his plans, Abraham made a few visits to the second-hand stores, priced one or two iron beam bedsteads, speculated about a new mattress, and carefully inspected an old Davenport that didn't look too bright but seemed to have some spring left. All in all, the idea seemed good. How much longer could the three of them squeeze their bodies and their personalities into Mrs. Plopler's big room? Of course, it would run into a bit of money, but rent he would have to pay anywhere, so long as he was working, and Isaac too brought in a little money from his paper carrier's route. Not that Abraham had spent a cent of it for themselves. Everything that the boy turned over went behind the counter into the bank. Isaac would need it someday. The more he thought of it, the more he felt that it was absolutely necessary to move. Of late, the landlady, for lack of anything else to occupy her mind with, had taken to watching Isaac and her girls. She had told both Sarah and Abraham on separate occasions in conspiratorial whispers that the youngsters were of an age where it was dangerous for them to be too familiar too much of the time. Doctors said. She didn't enlarge on what doctors said, but shrugged and sighed. Well, it's nature. Abraham had told her that Isaac was old enough to take care of himself, that he trusted his son, and that he hoped she could feel the same way about her daughters. Mrs. Plopler was horrified that he could think that she might mean such a thing. It wasn't that at all. Still, she managed to appear from unexpected places when Isaac was violently holding English conversations with the girls, and her smile and attitude paralyzed the boy's shy tongue into silence. Abraham took his family to look at the house. The landlord occupied the other half of it, but there were separate front doors and separate verandas, with a solid veranda wall between them that ensured a certain amount of privacy even on the porch. There was a backyard too, which could easily yield a small vegetable plot once they had moved the garbage can further back and cleared away the litter of wooden crates. The landlord's half of the backyard was almost completely occupied by a makeshift garage pieced together of boards, bits of corrugated tin, and old soft drink advertisements. But he had promised to let them pile the crates on the garage if they wanted to. Crates and garage were necessary to his business, the landlord had explained importantly to Abraham, who now repeated it to his family, though he could not tell Isaac what this business was, since it had not occurred to him to inquire. Well, Abraham turned cheerfully to his son as they paused for a second to admire the window that was set in the front door. It was made up of pieces of colored glass cut in fancy patterns, and with the light from the outside shining on it, it threw colored shadows on the coats rack in the front hall. What do you think, Isaac? Shall we take it? Isaac studied the window, aware that for the first time he was being asked to share the burden of an adult decision, and that the time was coming when he would have to make one for himself. I think so, he said seriously. Mrs. Plopler was not certain of how she should react. Sarah, with inspired tact, partly solved the landlady's dilemma by making her a partner in the decision. She was invited to an inspection of the new premises before they moved in. She was assured that she would always be a welcome guest. She was consulted as to the best type of coal for the furnaces. By the time they left, she had been won over and was even telling them why the move was a good idea. Of course, I understand, she would repeat. You are, after all, a family. One room is not enough, even though it's a very big room. It's not very nice for a grown boy to have to sleep in the same room as his parents. It's really a very nice little place you found, even if it's not in such a good district. But what can you do? You can only afford so much after all. And it's very nice that people who, after all, have not been in the country so very long should be able to rent a little house for themselves. It was years before we moved out of our apartment into this house. Of course, we didn't want to move until we found exactly what we wanted. The minute I saw it, I thought how lucky you are. What if there are a lot of bootleggers around here? We have to have everything to do with them? Of course, we can be just as good friends as ever. It's not so far after all, although it's what we call the real old flats. And if I am a little bit afraid of walking through those streets in the dark, then your husband can take me up a ways. Thus, with a mixture of determined good nature and acidity, Mrs. Plopler resigned herself to the loss of her tenants. All the same, she felt a little cheated, as though they had played a trick on her. It had all gone so smoothly, no disagreements, no arguments rising to a crescendo. It was almost as though the whole thing had happened behind her back. When the time came and Abraham started to pull away at the borrowed handcart, on which were piled the heavier of their recently accumulated belongings, while Isaac guided from behind, there were even a few tears from the landlady. Gertie and Goldie also watched from the steps. Isaac, with embarrassment, fancied what a funny picture he might make from behind as he leaned forward and pushed the clattering cart along. But he didn't care so much now. The girls were quite happy to be seen on the street with him, he knew, in spite of the fact that he was a greenhorn. He was no longer so green as before. They might giggle occasionally at his accent, but they were silent when he mentioned books that they didn't know. Sarah carried the blessings of bread and salt into their new home and placed it on the kitchen table. Then they brought in their belongings. They left her to arrange things while they went with the borrowed handcart to collect first the Davenport and afterward the dismantled frame bedstead. The new mattress was delivered later in the afternoon. They brought in 3 boxes from the backyard to sit on while they ate their first meal in their new home. With my next week's pay, said Abraham gallantly, raising his glass of lemon tea, I will invest in a chair for you, Sarah. And with my next week's pay, Isaac, unable to contain himself any longer, followed suit. I will invest in a chair for you, Pa. Abraham looked at Isaac searchingly. You'll have to sell a lot of papers, he said slowly. to buy me a chair. Isaac looked at his glass nervously. If I have time after work, I'll keep on with my paper route. But I think, Isaac steeled himself to raise his eyes to his father's, I might be able to give lessons in Yiddish and Hebrew in the evenings. My friend tells me that there are not many here who have studied as far as I have. I think I could even prepare boys for bar mitzvah if I keep on studying myself. You want? Abraham picked his words carefully. To quit going to English school? What sort of work will you do? The season is beginning now in the clothes factories. They're calling for boys to learn machining. A tailor. But I can study and teach in the evenings. Isaac trembled, and his heart beat more quickly, as he had begun to do at times ever since those days in the old country. I can't. Isaac gripped his glass violently and leaned forward, looking full into his father's face, his voice unnaturally high and dramatic. I can't let you go on carrying me on your shoulders. It's not as though things were. Isaac choked on his words and rushed on. I've already been to a place. I start work on Monday. In spite of his displeasure at their content, Abraham heard the intensity in his son's words with a sensation of pleasure. My son, he could not help thinking with a flash of pride. Underneath the shyness, underneath the timidity, was the voice of strength that he could raise up. On your shoulders, he knew the singing words. Isaac had subsided, but had not taken his eyes from his father's face. I'm old enough to make my own decision. He held these words in readiness, these and others, to back him up in his first big clash with his father. His face slightly twisted from excitement and the feeling in his heart. Sarah looked anxiously first at Isaac, then at Abraham, but she said nothing and waited. Well, said Abraham, after what seemed like a long time. Well, I never thought that my son would be a tailor. Somehow he had known that the question would arise. How much could he do for them, alone in the second half of his life in a new country, working for another man? But he would have tried. He would have gone on working and hoping. He felt a bitterness arising in him again. After all his plans, his son was to become a tailor in a sweatshop. But then, the Chassidim too had to work at other crafts while they studied. It was nothing new. He struggled. How ardent his eyes were and stubborn. All his children were stubborn. It's nothing, nothing, said Abraham. We don't have to be ashamed of having to work. My mother used to say, work will sweeten your life. It's a good thing that we have these sayings to remind us. I used to tell her sometimes when I was tired, God forgive me. So you feel you must help? Well, this too is something fine. We'll have a double celebration, a new house and a new man in the house. What sort of place is it where you will work? You've been to see it, them, eh? Without consulting your father. Well, a new world. You knew might not like it. What could I say? A man must make his own decisions, with God's help. They say, though, that in there is much vulgarity in these shops. I don't know if you will like it. And shut in. They say it's hot working over those machines. See that you don't get to drinking too much cold water when you're sweating inside. But then in the evenings, you will continue to study? Ah, there are many ways to reach an end. But your teachers in English school will be very sorry to see you go. Who knows what they had planned for you? Such a promising student. Isaac was surprised that the ordeal had passed, and so smoothly. He had braced himself as against a firm wall, and he had given away very easily, allowing him to fall into a new territory, a new part of his life. In his father's voice, there was a new tone that Isaac heard with pleasure. He had done the right thing. Neither of his brothers could have done a more proper thing at this moment. He moved with a light step to comfort his mother, who was weeping silently. He always wept now, he thought dispassionately, laying his hand on her head. Whenever anything new happened, whether it was a good thing or bad, She wept. It seemed to be the only answer that she had left to give to life when it made a gesture in her direction. But Sarah raised her head and smiled at him. A new man in the house. And that is it for the first part of chapter 3 of Sacrifice. Discovered a little bit of page 41 up to, I guess, the first third of page 45. So thank you for joining me tonight. I hope you liked my reading. And if you did, please leave a like and a subscribe. And I hope to see you again as we continue, hopefully, next week on the next part of the chapter. Again, this is Pixel Broadside, otherwise known as Pinoy Victoria. Thank you for joining me, and may you have a great evening. So, good night, and take care of yourselves.